Good evening. I am delighted to welcome you tonight to our evening with Chris Burnside. I'm Irene Oh, yeah. Woo! I'm Irene Harold, and while I was your door greeter and telling you where to hang your coat, I'm also the dean of the library and university librarian. No job too small or unimportant. It's all important. So we're thrilled you're here. Um, I have the pleasure of doing the housekeeping, which some of you have already discovered. When you go out the door, you turn to the right to get to the restrooms. And this is the quiet floor, which means conversations outside this room should not be louder than a whisper. So if you're talking louder than this, you're in trouble. And the students will let you know that you're in trouble. I also want to point out we've been rotating some of our upcoming events, which we do have quite a few on the schedule, including on Thursday night this week. If you really have a great time, come on back. And we are, oops, she's trying to get in the wrong door. Thanks. Um, Voices of Change is this Thursday, and it's an alumni panel. And I heard the community Zoom, and it was amazing. And some of our folks who were working on that, Irina and Karen and her team, totally, totally wonderful. And Crystal Carpenter and Special Collections and Archives are the hosts in groups, Digital Library Publishing with Karen Bjork. So I have my copy of Chris's book. We did a limited run with a local printer, and this is fabulous. We have 20 other copies that are at the back table that Karen Bjork would be delighted to sell you. We will invoice you because we can't take money right now. And then if we run out and you didn't get your copy yet and want one, we are going to be doing some on-demand printing, and that should be available in the next week or two. And we know who you are because you registered, so we can send you the information for the on-demand print copy if you need a copy or you need more to give away because it's so fabulous. And it is fabulous. So I'm not supposed to be introducing Chris, whom I think all of you actually know, but I'm delighted to invite Carl Green, who you also should know, to come and do Chris's formal introduction.
To put on my other eyes. There. So if you don't know me, my name is Carl, and I'm Chris Burnside's spouse/husband, and we're 4 days away from our 38th year anniversary. Thank you for coming, as well as joining us virtually for this event, a launch of Chris Burnside's book, The Man from Figueras, but also a celebration of the life and a career artist and educator. Chris began his career as a dancer here in Richmond with Francis Wessels very early in his 20s. He was a faculty member at UCLA in Los Angeles, where he also danced with Bella Lewitsky, touring nationally and internationally. Later, he had a career in New York City, where he danced with and for many known choreographers, one being Jane Comfort, who is still producing innovative and important choreography. Chris also produced his own work while in New York City. In the early 1980s, he was invited to teach at VCU's Department of Dance and Choreography, and soon after was brought on as a full-time faculty, later to become chair, and at the end of his tenure at VCU as the Assistant Dean of Student Affairs for the School of the Arts. Chris made huge contributions while at VCU, and with a core group of talented faculty, put VCU on the map as one of the most prominent dance and choreography departments in the country. VCU graduates were known throughout the United States, with many making Europe their home. Chris brought many successful dance artists for half semester and semester residencies, applied for major grants, which allowed VCU Dance to bring prominent dance companies to perform for the community. At the top of his accomplishments, while chair, was to turn a once famous Richmond porno house into what we now know as Great Street Theater. If you are interested in learning more about Chris's choreography and performances, VCU Library Archives and Special Collections houses documentation of much of his work. There are many people that we would like to thank for making this book and this evening possible. Chris asked 3 longtime friends to serve as readers and give their feedback. Zan Brunner, painter and educator from Rochester, New York. Melanie Richards, fellow dance faculty while a member at VCU. And Eleanor Rufty, well-loved, known, and accomplished Richmond painter. We'd also like to thank the following VCU Library staff. For the production of the book, Sam Bird, scholarly publishing librarian, for his tireless, quick, and generous work editing. Thank you, Sam. Abby Childs, open educational research librarian, digital libraries, and publishing, for doing the layout of the book and making it ready to go to print as well as digitally. For making tonight's event possible, especially Ryan Pander Larson, events manager, Karen Bjork, head of digital libraries and publishing, Crystal Carpenter, head of special collections and archives, Sue Robinson, director of communications and PR, and a special thank you to Irene Harold, Dean of Libraries and University Librarian, for her continued support. Chris became a storyteller with the ability to grab the audience at a very young age. In fact, his father, Jim Burnside, was a master at telling stories. Perhaps Chris learned from one of the best. Early on as a choreographer, Chris would use the spoken word within his work, told stories as ways to teach his classes, and later would write, produce, and perform 2 evening-length monologues, marrying words to movement. These works were Fort Head, about a gay man's journey while serving in the Army during the Vietnam era, and Travelogue, about our 7-week drive across the country. Both works received glowing reviews. In the early 2000s, Chris's best friend, Zan Brunner, who he had met in college, suggested that he produce a book including some of his best stories. He had never thought of himself as a writer, but realized that he had been writing and telling stories throughout his career and as an educator and dance artist. It took several years to write the stories included in The Man from Figueras. In 2023, Chris gave a reading of 28 of his stories here at the VCU Library, supported by Crystal Carpenter, head of special collections and archives, and Jimmy Gafferty. And after the reading, Jimmy Gafferty, Associate Dean of Scholarly Communications and Publishing, and Karen Bjork, head of the Digital Libraries and Publishing, suggested that Chris would finish the rest of his stories, that VCU would publish the book on the scholarly compass. The completed publication includes 90 stories written chronologically from first memories to his mid-70s. Tonight, Chris will read 10 of these stories, which were selected by the people who were acknowledged earlier in the thank yous. Chris Burnside.
Okay. Well, thank you, Carl. Your words really made me feel good.
And made me nervous.
So greetings. It's wonderful to be here. I would say in the process of aging, I have noticed that there are things that I can't do as much as I would like that I used to be able to do. So my antidote to that was to every now and then just blow the roof off, do something outside the back box or something absolutely fabulous. And for you to be here tonight is absolutely fabulous. And so here we are. So I thank you for coming. I thank you for Zooming. I would say just before I get started, in my life, if something happened to me that changed my perspective, that caught my eye or changed my perspective, or it was something that I learned, not something that I was taught, but something that I learned, it became indelible. I just remembered it. And I remembered minute details about it decades and decades later. So it truly does mean a lot that you are here. You know, our journey has been long and there's still some more to do. So we're going to get started and gotta lubricate the larynx. Okay. My family lived in Charlotte, North Carolina when I attended high school. And this first story is from that high school. In 11th and 12th grade in high school, I ran cross country. I really wasn't into it that much, but ran for two reasons. The first reason was my physical education teacher said that I was really fast. He wanted me on the team and he encouraged me to join the team. But the more important reason was I wanted to letter. I wanted to wear a sweater with the big block E for East Mecklenburg High School on it. The sweater was royal blue and the letter was golden yellow, our school colors. I was not a part of the popular crowd, and almost all the popular guys were into sports and had received letters and wore those sweaters almost every day, or their girlfriends wore them. So I ran. Cross country was rough, 3.1 miles as fast as you could run. The coach was always talking about getting a second win somewhere in the middle of the race if you were really pushed. But that had only ever happened to me once. It was also rough because back then, they trained us to run almost exclusively on the balls of our feet, hardly ever engaging the heel. I don't think they ever discussed any kind of heel to ball roll through. My first year, which was my junior year, my long shinned legs developed painful shin splints. As the season wore on, the shin splints got worse, and they affected my running, my speed, and my standing on our team. Consequently, I did not letter my junior year. My shin splints were so bad that first year that in one away game, I literally crawled across the athletic field at the end of the race, almost missing the bus ride home. But I was not daunted. I wanted that letter. My senior year, I tried out again, ditched my cross country shoes and ran in my basketball shoes. They helped because automatically they made me use my heel as well. I was again really not into it, but my standing on the team elevated. Things were going so well that my sister, Diane, I see you out there, now a 10th grader in the JV cheerleader squad, planned to bring some of her friends to watch one of our home meets. She couldn't make the start of the race, but promised to be there for the finish. We started out by running a lap around the track that circled the athletic field, and then headed into the woods for 2.5 miles. Before returning to the track, in the woods, I was all strategy. If I heard someone behind me approaching to pass, I would glance back to see who it was. If they were on the other team, I let them go by without a fight. Absolutely no team spirit. I just wanted a letter, which was based on our standing on our team. If I saw the person attempting to pass was a member of our team, I poured it on and fought not to let them pass, as I said. no team spirit. I didn't care if our team won or lost. I just did what I wanted. That particular day, I really pushed out in the woods, running hard to avoid losing my rank on the team, which meant I was totally spent when we came out of the woods for our reverse direction loop around the field to the finish line. As I entered the track, I was gasping for breath, and by the last curve, I started dry heaving. I crossed the finish line, vomiting all over my legs. My sister and her friends had made it to the meet. She looked on in disbelief. When her friends asked her which one was her brother, she said, "I don't know what happened. I don't see him anywhere." That year, I let her. After high school came college. Sight unseen, I applied and was accepted to Richmond Professional Institute, RPI, which much to our chagrin, the students, became VCU our senior year. Oh my God, oh my God. I loved RPI. It was one of the most incredible chapters of my life. Spring semester of my junior year, I was taking second year painting with our fabulous freshman Introduction to the Arts professor, Richard Carline. For the class, I was working on a series of large, sharp-angled shaped canvases inspired by Frank Stella, but with a pastel Disney sense of color. Dick would wander the room looking at our work and sit with each of us discussing it and asking where we intended to go with it. Then, if you were lucky, he shifted into conversations about life and art. During that semester, I shared with him that I was into dance. I was considering trying to have a career in it. Then, much to my surprise, he shared with me that he had danced too, studying the Graham technique in college. His senior year, he was awarded a scholarship to the Martha Graham Studio in New York City. But upon graduation, he was drafted into the Korean War era military. The classes I was taking were also modern-based. I told him that I was torn between dance, in which I had not much experience, and the visual arts, which had always been my practice. He nodded and then pointed out that dance, the art form, was a young person's career. And if I was interested in pursuing it, now was the time to do so. He didn't pursue dance, he said, because by the time his Army stint was over, he felt he was too old. His words about dance resonated with me, and sometime that semester, I decided I would pursue dance. But I made a personal vow that I would come back to art and a solo studio practice later in my life. Those discussions with Dick would end up influencing the trajectory of my life, my entire life. At some point, he also told me that he had danced in the Williamsburg outdoor summer drama, The Common Glory, and that maybe I should check it out. I did. I auditioned, I got in, and I paid, instantly becoming a professional dancer. I was drafted into the Vietnam era military the December after I graduated from college. I exited the Army as damaged goods. Only years later did I understand the value of my time in the Army, but while I was in, all I wanted to do was get out. So I applied for a 3-month early out to go back to school. I was accepted, sight unseen, into the graduate program in dance at Florida State University. I met with the department chair, Nancy Smith Victor, upon arrival in Tallahassee. I think I saluted her when I entered her office. During her meeting, her eyes appraised my potential. Her response was, "Christopher, we're very pleased," spoken in her uniquely laconic Florida drawl. I always loved her accent, but ... Before being drafted, I had been studying dance in New York City. In basic training, running our brand new combat boots every single day had injured my Achilles tendons. After basic, I was stationed in Texas and found a ballet class in the town outside the fort to continue my studies. But after several months, the doctors told me to stop taking class and put me in a cast for 8 weeks. The cast went from my foot to my knee. After the cast came off, I found I really couldn't take class for the rest of my time in the Army. I became depressed and joined other depressed guys in the barracks who went out drinking every night. It turned out I was especially gifted at drinking. One of the other depressed guys and I became best friends. We spent all of our time together, and after a while, I fell in love with him. My feelings were not returned, and I fell much further into a major depression. I bought a package of razor blades, and it was not good. I was broken emotionally and extremely hostile upon arrival at Florida State. I started the semester with bottled fury, all pretty much hidden behind my introverted soft exterior. I chafed against anything that even hinted at control or authority, and that included any teacher I had who possessed any. Eventually, Nancy was my teacher in composition. At the end of the first class, she gave us the homework assignment of creating a signature movement phrase. "What is your definition of phrase?" I interrogated. She looked at me. "Just the shortest, unenhanced piece of movement you can come up with." The next class, everyone showed their phrases, dashing around the room, down to the floor and back up, dancing up a storm. When it came my turn, I stood up, looked her directly in the eyes, and said, "This is my phrase," and did 4 military steps in one direction, pivoted smartly, and did 4 military steps back to my starting point, all the while never dropping my gaze from her. She just looked at me and then said, "Class, your second assignment is to enhance your phrase." "What do you mean by enhance it?" "Add to it, manipulate it." When it came my time to show next class, I stood up. "This is my phrase," performing my military steps back, 4 military steps and 4 military steps returning. "Now I'm going to manipulate my phrase." Looking at her defiantly, I put my hands on my breasts, massaging them suggestively, while I repeated my phrase. She just stared. "Now, I would like you to develop your phrase." "What do you mean by develop?" "Find your theme's essence and add onto it with complementary or contrasting material." I went home. I was playing one of my Led Zeppelin albums. One song had a pretty intense verse that ended with some words about a woman's soul being created below. Next class, I repeated my phrase and the manipulation, followed by the military steps a third time, speaking Led Zeppelin's lyrics with disdain, all the while lethally focused on Nancy. After that performance, she asked, "Christopher, did you write those words?" "No, that's Led Zeppelin." And so it went. Further developed, further enhanced, crafted into a whole, established a beginning, middle, and end. For my studies culmination, I pulled a hidden banana out from under my arm, masturbated it, threw it on the ground, and stepped onto it with a releve arabesque. Hushed silence. No response. Several weeks later, Nancy approached me and asked if I would perform my study at that week's workshop class. Workshop was a class that all the majors, both the undergrads and the grads, took together. Without thinking, I said yes. At workshop, she introduced me. "Now, Christopher will perform his study from composition class. It is the angriest piece I have ever witnessed in my entire career as a teacher." I was shocked and absolutely mortified at being so revealed. I was so self-conscious it was hard to perform it with anything like its original intent. Years later, I would realize that I had been taught by a master. I'm just looking at for the person who suggested this one. Okay. Melanie. I lived in Los Angeles for 8 years. For at least half of that time, I lived in Venice Beach, and my building was right on the boardwalk. I could see the ocean from my window, and at night I could hear the waves. I lived on the 3rd floor facing south, and on the 2nd floor facing north lived an old woman who became my friend. Her name was Opal Kelly. Ever since she'd been a little girl, she hated the name Opal, so everyone just called her Kelly. When I met Kelly, she was 74 years old. She'd been married 6 times. She had fingernails almost an inch long, and she had the ability that no matter what the situation, she could make people laugh. A lot of times on Saturday night, we would get together, smoke cigarettes, and watch TV. We usually watched Dance Fever because she said in her youth she had been dance crazy. Around that time, I joined a men's group. All the guys in it were gay. And the first night I attended, the topic of conversation was drag, and it was a hot one, with some guys arguing that it was not something they would ever do in their lives, and some arguing that it was fine to do. Except for dressing up as Raggedy Ann when I was a kid, trick-or-treating with my friend John, I'd never done drag. Maybe because Raggedy Ann hadn't turned out too well, the drag job idea made me quite nervous. But when the group decided that as an experiment, we should have a session at someone's house in drag, I thought, oh, what the hell. I went out and I bought a wig, a very large blonde afro wig. When I came home, I went downstairs and I tried it on for Kelly. She told me I was beautiful. She also wanted me to try on some of her clothes, which I thought was a little weird. But I did anyway. At one point, I was standing there in this very large royal blue beach muumuu, large flowers all over it, hit me just above the knee, had my wig on and a pair of her clip-on shell earrings. She looked at me, smiled, and said, I think the night of your party, you should get dressed upstairs in your room, go down to the street, find your car, as proud as anybody, don't let anybody say anything to you, and drive across town to your party. That idea made me really nervous. And even though it was a very good idea, I was way too much of a wimp and drove across town to the party and got dressed there. The party was in Silver Lake, the east side of Los Angeles. And one of the guys had driven all the way from Long Beach dressed as a nurse. When I put on my outfit and looked at into the mirror, I saw that I was not pretty at all. And there was no way that anyone would have ever thought I was a woman. And I was actually disappointed that that was true. If the guy dressed as a nurse had been stopped by a cop on the way, they would never have ever considered that he was a male. He looked that great. The party turned out to be wonderful. Guys with beards and hats, cocktail dresses, all kinds of gowns with hairy cleavage. There was lots of laughter and mutual appreciation, and I felt a sense of camaraderie and joy on the drive home. When I walked out of my apartment building the next morning and saw all the men in their shirts and pants, they looked like they were wearing some kind of uniform, and it looked rigid and limiting to me. I didn't feel that way. I felt free. Huh? Hmm? Okay, so this one's about you. Okay. I think a lot of people have heard this one, but anyway, here we go. The night I met Carl, things were certainly not aligned to meeting the love of my life. The fault with that was 100% mine. I was 4 years out from a combustible one-year relationship in New York City. And after moving to Richmond, I had spent those 4 years licking my wounds and analyzing what had gone wrong and what part I had played in what had gone wrong. I focused on my career and I did not get out much, which left me gun shy and repressed, which was the case. I met Carl. I'd recently been in charge of a huge dance concert in the department, leaving me with very little downtime for weeks. So the weekend after the concert, I went out with only one thought in mind: I will get laid. I went to a small Carytown gay bar called Christopher's and knocked back several glasses, which meant that by the time I spotted Carl, I was well on my way to being wasted. Carl was pencil thin, very good looking, with a full head of dark brown hair styled straight up and a mustache. He was also wearing an ankle-length white coat. He looked good and definitely pulled together. He was up against the wall in conversation with a young black guy. I barged over and in and said, "Hi." Carl turned and looked at me and said, "I'm talking to someone, but if you wait a few minutes." That was very Carl. I went back to my stool and sat impatiently for a bit. The second time I blundered over, Carl politely broke off his conversation. It turned out that he knew who I was from attending one of my concerts, which I think was the only reason he overlooked my rude behavior. I didn't know him. I wasn't really interested in knowing him. Desperate, horny, and rude. That's who I was that night. After a perfunctory conversation, we ended up back at my place where the deed was done. Probably 3:30 or 4 in the morning, I sat up in bed. Carl opened his eyes. "What's wrong?" I said, "Oh, in the morning, I probably won't find you very attractive at all, and I'll ask you to go home." There was a pause. Then Carl sat up too, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Number one, you will never find me unattractive." And number two, I'm not going home. Good answer. I lay back down and instantly went back to sleep. We have been together ever since, which Carl told you was 38 years this coming Saturday. I had to find this person too. I agree. One year, while I was serving as chair of the dance department, the National American College Dance Festival was held at Arizona State in Phoenix. We had a student piece that had been selected for the gala, and I was attending. I checked the map to see how far Phoenix was from the Grand Canyon, as I had always wanted to visit it. It looked like I could extend my trip afterwards and go. Further research revealed that there were whitewater rafting trips down the Colorado, and I was definitely interested in that. The festival was in early May, and we hadn't heard about it being included in the gala until April. And Carl said there was no way I'd be able to make a reservation for rafting that late. When I asked him if he was interested in going, he said no. His response, I knew, was in part because he didn't swim. I started making some calls to rafting companies and got lucky almost immediately with Adventures West. "Yes, we have a couple spots available for that week. How many seats do you need?" I turned to Carl. "How many seats do I need?" Carl looked stricken, paused a second, and then said, "Two." After the festival, I flew to Las Vegas to meet Carl. The next day, we took a small plane to a tiny airport near the trip's starting point. We were taken the rest of the way by van. There were approximately 30 of us, plus the guides. While on the river, we sat in two huge elliptical pontoons. We all sat on the two sides, facing the sides of the canyon, which meant that to see where we were going, you had to turn your head over one of your shoulders. At the end of the first day, my pre-arthritic dancer's neck was not happy, and I suggested to everyone, thought it was a great idea, that maybe the next day we would sit on the opposite side of the pontoon to give our necks a break by turning to look over the other shoulder. Everyone looked at me with absolutely no comprehension. Next morning, and waiting in line to visit the ammo box where we did our number 2 business, I overheard several of the others talking about how weird I was for having said that. Great. I'm definitely an introvert and definitely suspicious of everyone. Now my fear of everybody being prejudiced against us for being gay kicked in as well. Of course, this reached an ever-escalating progression of thoughts until I was sure they were going to come to our tent at night and beat the shit out of us. Or maybe even murder us. Not only did it seem like we were the only 2 gay guys on the trip, it also seemed like we were the only 2 artists. For supper, our guides would build a huge fire where we sat and ate and socialized. The second night, I made sure to sit on the periphery, mostly out of the shadow, so as not to draw attention to myself or be noticed. I didn't talk much either, but not Carl. He was right at the center in the middle of the conversation, sitting between 2 manly men. At one point, I heard him explaining in great detail the prom dress that he made for his best friend in high school. God, Carl, don't. I used a pink taffeta, a little piping around the waist, ruffled neckline. She was the most beautifully dressed girl at the prom, and I designed the dress. Help. Disaster, Carl. The more Carl claimed the spotlight and the more sewing flourishes he described, the more nervous I got. But then I noticed their faces. They were spellbound. The entire group was involved with this story. And from that point on, they loved him. Sitting over in the darkness, I realized that when they came to our tent at night, probably the only person who was going to get murdered was me. I didn't get murdered. You can tell, right? Our first day on the river, Carl and I sat at the front of our pontoon because we wanted to see where we were going. Everyone had to wear a life jacket, and the guides said that it didn't matter if you could swim or not. If for some reason you fell overboard or the pontoon capsized, we were all supposed to try and face forward with our legs straight out in front of us to rappel off any river rocks or boulders. It was still early May, and the only time it felt warm was when the sun was briefly passed over the opening at the top of the canyon. That first day, we had worn lots of clothes to stay warm, but after the first rapids drenched us, we were both sopping wet and cold for the rest of the day. After that, Carl just wore a swimsuit under his rain gear. Most people on the trip wore rain gear to keep dry. He said if he just wore a bathing suit, he dried off faster. But after the first day, we mostly didn't sit near the front because we had been so miserable. The very last day, we made sure we were at the very back of the pontoon as we were going to hit the wildest rapids of the river, Lava Falls. As an extra precaution, Carl had put his favorite shoes in a large Ziploc baggie and had them in his lap where he could hold on to them. As we approached Lava Falls, the guides told us to hold on to all the tie lines as tightly as we could. And then we were plunging down, water coming at us from all directions. Almost immediately, our pontoon slammed into a boulder, pivoted a full 180 degrees, and we were now heading down backwards, which meant we couldn't see where we were going, and we were absolutely submerged. We were holding on for dear life, and at one point, I heard this painful, high-pitched scream over the roar of it all coming out of Carl. As we started to exit the rapids, my shoes, my shoes! In the hysteria of trying to avoid getting washed into the river, Carl's shoes had vanished off his lap and disappeared. He was despondent. Later that morning, we arrived at the rendezvous spot where we would meet the helicopters that would carry us out of the canyon. Dejected, Carl just sat in silence while the guides unpacked the camping and cooking gear from the pontoons and waiting for the copters. Toward the end of the process, Carl looked up as one of the guides walked toward him with his shoes. which they had found at the very bottom of the backpacks and the gear in the water under the pontoon. They had been discovered floating under the very bottom tarp, still ziplocked and absolutely dry. Carl couldn't believe it. He was so euphoric. He said he was going to write a product endorsement letter to the Ziploc bag company. When he got home, oh God, I got to see somebody else too. In June of 1991, Carl and I met my brother Mike. Oh yeah, hey. And his wife Miriam in Madrid, Spain, for a 2-week cultural tour / vacation. The highlight for me in Madrid was seeing Picasso's Guernica at the Prado Museum. The highlight of our stay in Barcelona was definitely Gaudi's still in progress cathedral, the Sagrada Familia. After Barcelona, we moved on to Figueras, as we were all interested in seeing the Salvador Dali Museum. The afternoon of our first day there, I don't think we visited the Dali Museum until the next day. Carl and I were walking back to our hotel alone. As we walked along the cobblestones, an old man was walking toward us. As we passed, I noticed his eyes. They were light in color, and the eyelids and the skin all around the eyes were lavender and white, like mine. In many other ways, he looked like me as well. But I was in my early 40s, at the height of my dancer's physicality, and he looked to be in his late 80s. Immediately after passing him, I stopped and turned around. He had done the same and was staring at my eyes. It felt like I was looking at myself in another 40 years. As we continued to stare, his eyes filled with tears, and I realized that mine had too. After a moment, we both turned away and walked on into our lives. Sam's back there. Yeah. Sam Bird suggested this one. 2001 was a turning point. I self-produced an evening-length movement monologue entitled Travelogue at the Lark Theater in New York City. It ran Fridays and Saturdays for the entire month of August, ending just days before 9/11. It was about the 7-week road trip Carl and I had taken in 1997, focusing on our observations about what was happening environmentally to our country's landscape and my life with Carl. A reviewer from the New York Times said the best thing about Travelogue was getting to meet Carl. Well, of course. How could it not be? But he didn't pay the $12,000 bill for the run in New York. But no hard feelings. Probably my third or fourth weekend, an interesting phenomenon occurred. I was in the middle of the piece when I stepped out of my body. I was aware that I was still talking and gesturing somewhere behind me, but I was also intently looking around, noticing people smiling and laughing. They seemed to be enjoying themselves, but I had a strong revelation that I didn't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of saying, hey, look at me, I've got something important to say. I felt the reverse. I didn't want to get up in front of people anymore and talk about myself and my perspective any longer, except for tonight. I wanted to stop. I stepped back into myself and finished the performance. After everyone had left, I asked the stage manager, Bob Ed Pierce, how the show had gone that night. How did I do? Because it had felt really weird. He said I seemed to be at the top of my game. Huh. At the end of August, I finished the run and came back to Richmond to start the fall semester. The first day of school before morning modern technique, I was in a studio warming up and planning class. I started like I almost always did, standing still and then gradually rounding over and back up, adding the arms and then movement, Almost immediately, my body responded, "We don't want to do this anymore." "But you have to. I have a job." I pushed through, finished up warming up and planning, and taught a great class. The day continued, and I forgot about the message from my body. Just a glitch. But during the next morning's warm up and planning in the studio by myself, the same body message: "We don't want to do this anymore. It hurts." And why shouldn't it? I was 54 years old and had danced every day, all day long since I was 24. And that's the way it was. Every morning for a couple of weeks until I said, "Okay, you have got my attention." So this is us getting married. This is us getting married. Oh no, there's another one before that. Okay. Oh yeah, Abby suggested this. In my 50s, I became the point person for my father's care. One day he had a dental appointment and I was late picking him up at his living facility. It was totally my fault. Our Lady of Hope was a 45-minute drive from our house, and I had tried to get too many things crossed off the to-do list before leaving. Dad originally was in the assisted care wing at Our Lady of Hope, but now after a series of mini strokes, he was living in the Christopher Center, the memory care unit. Once I got there, I would need to park the car, go into the facility, walk the long hallway through assisted living, enter the Christopher Center, get him up and out of his chair, into his coat, and then get back through the building on his walker, and then go get the car and bring it around and load him in and his walker, and then drive to the dentist. We would definitely be late, and I was pretty stressed by the time I got to his room. He was in his recliner. "Dad, we're late." "I want to show you something." "I know, but we're late. We got to go. But I want to show you." "You can show me when we get back." I helped him out of the recliner and reached for his coat. "But look at this." I raised my voice. "What? What is it?" He walked me over to the window. I was impatient. "What?" He pointed out and said, "Do you see how the clouds are ever so slowly moving past each window pane?" "God, Dad." I exhaled with exasperation, leaned forward, and looked out. The clouds were imperceptibly moving, almost suspended as they passed each pane. Time paused. I softly exhaled. I saw. My neck released and my shoulders dropped, and we were standing side by side. "Beautiful, Dad. Thank you. Now we really do have to go." This is it. Carl and I had never wanted to get married. But early on, when I suggested that just the two of us could go off into the woods and have our own commitment ceremony, Carl said no, that we would be together as long as we were supposed to be together. But not being married meant that we had to work with our lawyers on a legal document that attempted to protect both of us. It was a complex undertaking. We were living in North Carolina when gay marriages became legal. Immediately, some states started legalizing and performing them, but North Carolina definitely was not one of them. We went round and around discussing it. "No, absolutely not. I don't want to mimic anything. As an institution, it doesn't seem to be working very well anyway." Round and round until we realized that being legally married covered a myriad of loopholes that we would never be able to remember. Finally, we decided that for legal and financial reasons, we would do it. This was 2013, and we started researching which state we could get married in, and then where, and who could perform the ceremony. We settled on the city clerk's office in Manhattan. We contacted our nearest and dearest and told them what we were doing. At that point, we had been together 25 years and weren't interested in having a big ceremony. It was a legal/financial arrangement only, period. But we would need 2 witnesses. So we invited my nephew, Andrew, and Carl's former student, Caitlin, who both lived in New York City. The two of us flew to New York and went by ourselves to the clerk's office to apply for a marriage license. The clerk's office was packed that day with hordes of people, each applying for something: marriage, divorce, death certificates, business licenses. You took a number depending on what your needs were and waited until your number appeared on the screen with the window to go to. We were there several hours and couldn't sit for at least the first hour. When a seat finally became available, it was on a long forest green velour sofa. I turned to my right and found we were sharing the sofa with two women. I bet I know why you're here. We just flew up from Atlanta this morning. I don't believe any of this, but Betty doesn't have health insurance, and I thought it was worth at least trying to take a shot at it. Eventually, our number was called, and we applied for our license and found we could come back the next day to pick it up and get married in one of their chapels. The next morning, we met Andrew and Caitlin out front of the clerk's office. Andrew had brought us 2 white roses, and the 4 of us went inside. Again, we took a number and waited, this time to pick up and have all 4 of us sign the license, and then sit and wait again until our names were called for the ceremony. Our second day at the clerk's office was total joyous chaos. It seemed like everyone was getting married. Old straight hippies in torn jeans, young Hispanic couples in huge wedding gowns and tuxedos throwing rice, lesbians, gay guys. Everybody looked so happy. And the 4 of us were soon mega giddy and laughing at everything. And then there were our names on the board. We made our way up to the chapel lobby. Tom and Jennifer, you're in chapel 1. Christopher and Carl, you're in chapel 2. At chapel 2's doors was a short Hispanic guy, our officiant. I leaned forward to read his name tag. Oh, my name is Angel Lopez, and I want you to never forget that today you were married by an angel. Huh. We went inside, and Angel went up to the front and turned to face the 4 of us, still giddy and laughing at anything. Angel began the service. The first couple of sentences flew right over my head. And then, Christopher, do you take Carl to be your lawfully wedded husband? Those words hit me like a ton. I realized on some level that I thought I would never hear those words directed to me in my life. My throat closed. Helium bubble burst. I couldn't talk. After a moment, Carl elbowed me in the ribs. What's going on? I'm not having second thoughts. I'm just trying to get myself together so I can speak. Afterwards, Carl and I took the 4 of us out for a champagne brunch to celebrate. That afternoon, the 2 of us went to a midtown craft beer tavern. We had researched that had 76 different types of beer on tap. Very attractive. The bartender was a woman who informed us with pain in her face that she had a massive migraine. And what have you 2 done today? Gesticulating wildly, and in a treble shriek, I responded, "We just got married." I think on the spot, I totally exorcised her migraine. Carl ordered a hot pepper stout from the Southwest, and I got something not so spicy. The bartender disappeared and came back from the basement with a special oyster stout from Italy to celebrate. It was horrible. But we drank every single drop of its good intention. Soon everyone in the bar knew about our day. Beers appeared out of nowhere, and lots of Jersey guys came over to shake our hands, slap us on the back, and hug us. They got to me. When we left the bar and stepped outside, I had to hold on to Carl because I was plastered. And the sidewalk seemed to loom right in front of my face. Later that night, as we were walking in the West Village, Carl said, "Do you feel any different?" "I do. I used to think we were threads outside the weave of the human fabric, and now it feels like we've been woven in. I feel really good. Do you feel any different?" "No, not at all." So is your thing on? So we thought we'll at least pause or finish or whatever, but take a couple questions if you have any. Did you,
I have a mic and we would ask that folks do use the mic so folks on Zoom can hear your question. So
You can
feel
do
free to
that?
raise your hand if you do have a question for Chris.
I can tell you my middle name. Nicken. Yes, there we go. Sorta, yeah.
The
Yeah,
question
sorta.
was, does he consider himself a writer now for folks on Zoom?
So I think the thing that convinced me that I was a writer was that I was dancing. I was performing with Tim Miller, a performance artist up in New York City, and we did at the Kitchen. We did a performance of his piece. No, that was my piece. I can't remember the name of his piece. Something. Sorry, Tim. Anyway, we went after we performed at the Kitchen. We went to an international theater festival in Brussels, Belgium, and we performed at 7 o'clock at night. And after our performance, Tim says there's another American here, and he has a midnight show. And do you want to go? And I said, oh, sure, I'll go to that. And a bunch of us went, and it was a revelation. It was Spalding Gray. It was just, I was transfixed. He totally just transported me and inspired me. And I came back to New York City and I went, good old dad, I can tell a story, and so I started preparing a story. I had never made a piece. And me and my friend, my lesbian friend, Susan, we decided to split a concert, and we produced it ourselves at PS 122 in the East Village. And so I got to work. I got 4 dancers and started choreographing, and then I just started writing the stories out. No, I didn't write them. I just started practicing. These stories I was going to tell about Opal Kelly, knowing Opal Kelly in Venice, California. And the more I practiced by myself, it was more like, oh, and then she said, oh, why don't you try on some of my clothes? And I went, oh my God, this is going to be disaster. This is just going to be disaster. So, I was an experienced dancer. So I came up with this method. I decided that every word I said, every word I said, every word I said would have a movement to it. And I was petrified. I was petrified that audience came in, and I remember they were all sitting there, the lights went up, and I went, and then they were laughing, and I was just like, this is just so weird. I don't know what I'm saying, So then after that, Susan and I got this incredible review in Dance Magazine. And so then I started I started telling stories on stage, but I never ever stopped, my technique this way. And lots of times it was just, so the audience really didn't know all the time. So my friend Suzanne thought that I should write. She said, you have such great stories you've told over the years and told over the years and told over the years and over the years. And you should write them down. And then I went, oh, yeah, no, I do that thing. I do that thing, and I hone all the words till they're absolutely pristine. And the great follow-up to that story is Spalding Gray came to the museum. And, I went to that, and Ashley Kistler generously, graciously invited me after the performance to have dinner with Spalding. And, so I was really interested to talk to him. And I said, I want to know, do you figure out every single word? And he said, no, I just talk. And I went, wow, that's radical, because I am just like every single word, I would find exactly the right word that I wanted that would convey what I wanted to say. And it went along with a little something, And so now, yes, once I understood that, I went, well, no, I think I am a writer, but it's a very specific kind of writer.
We do have two online if nobody else in the room has one. So the first is from Susan. It says, and this is for Carl, actually. It says,
Well-
Carl,
Okay.
how does it feel to hear these heartfelt stories about your life together in front of an audience?
Don't tell people.
It's hard, you know, it's hard to say after being together for 38 years and hearing these stories and hearing them and hearing them. And some of them are embellished. I never, ever would have made a pink taffeta dress for anybody. Never. It would never have high ruffles, and if I did, it wouldn't have been taffeta, it would have been silk charmeuse. And it would have been a halter and it would have shown off like, you know, but it's good, you know, but like it's a really good question because when he did Travelogue, which is kind of like this, he wrote and did all these things, but we were both very busy and doing different things. And I never knew about it until I was sitting in the audience. I didn't know any of it. And then I realized it was a story about our trip. I didn't know any of the stories. And I didn't know that some of them were embellished until I actually sat there and listened to them. But it's
Awesome.
good. It's great. Yeah.
So I would say the travelogue story, specifically one I read tonight about the pink taffeta dress. And, you know, what I learned, and I have learned so much from him, what I learned was he was just who he was. And he hid nothing. And people loved him, you know, and I was over there sort of, you know, editing what I was going to say and how I was going to present myself. And he was just right there. And authenticity just cuts through everything, you know, if you're true to yourself. And this is who he is.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have one more in chat says, as you look back over your accomplishments, would you do anything differently? Very big existential.
Oh, sure. There are lots of things, you know, I said to people along the way, and but they were mostly mean people anyway. So, so what time is it?
We're at 8:10, so we can
It's
move into
what?
8:10, so we can move into book signing if you're ready for it, or if you
So
want
I
to read
could
one
I
more.
could read one more
Yeah,
story.
you do have one more.
Oh. So you're gonna decide this one. I have this crass story that I think you might think differently about me after I've read it. I could read this sort of read read them both. Okay. All right.
It's really short.
The second one's really short. Okay, and I would like to say, because this one involves my father, and I love my father. He was a really, really great guy. And I came to understand what a great guy he was later in life. And, you know, when I was his caretaker, you know, out of the blue, I'd never heard anything about World War II. I had heard nothing about World War II. That generation of men came home, buttoned it, and they got married, and they had their children, and they raised their children, and they, you know, they did really, really wonderful work. They were wonderful people. But this particular, as a young, overly sensitive guy, this story was written by that 15-year-old. This story came when I was 15. So here we go. My father served in the military during World War II when he was in his early 20s. He was an officer, and as a man adored him. He had the right stuff and the right circumstances at the right time. In his early 30s, he used that same skill set raising his young family. But this time, it was not as effective. All of us kids chafed at the military discipline, and some of us resented it greatly. When the orders were issued, I seethed. His word was law, and that was it. No was not an option. And as his anger could escalate quickly, it was his way only. To give myself some relief, I had developed an approach to dealing with his authority, but I could only use it very sparingly. I had found that if I got too weird, really weird, he didn't know how to respond. One day, my parents were out at the grocery store. Freedom. I was in the living room by myself dancing, which I did often. It was sort of a free form movement. And sometimes I would practice stuff I'd seen on TV. But that day, as I danced, I was also experiencing just awful gas, releasing the densest stench imaginable. I thought, oh my God, no one would ever believe how horrible this is. In our living room, up on the formal mantle, was a pair of chestnut brown cloisonne vases that Mom and Dad had received as wedding presents. Inspiration. I heard the family car in the driveway, so I had to act fast, and I did, quickly turning one of the vases upside down on its teak pedestal, just as Dad came through the back door. Chris, come bring in the bar groceries, he barked. I started to simmer, and when I didn't immediately respond, he came looking. When he found me in the living room, he asked sharply, "What are you doing?" I turned to him and smiled. "Nothing." "Oh, hell, boy." He strode over the mantel, picked up, I just said, "Oh, no. Nothing. But there's something wrong with this cloisonne vase. It smells just terrible." "Oh, hell, boy." He strode over to the mantel, picked up the vase, and crammed his nose in it, inhaling deeply. "Oh, my God, that's horrible. What happened to that?" I held a beat and then responded, "I farted into it." He hesitated. His face went blank. And for an instant, he wasn't on solid ground. And for that instant, I had absolute power. Okay. Okay, this is the last one. For the holidays in December of 2009, Carl and I flew to Las Vegas for 10 days. We soon realized that Vegas was just as we remembered it and rented a car so we could get out and about. One day we drove the 125 miles to Death Valley as we had never been. Temperatures in Death Valley in December were pleasant, and after driving for a while, we parked the car and went for a hike up through one of the canyons. There were massive boulders on either side, bleached to a palette of near white to dark orange browns. We hiked for quite a while. We weren't alone, as there were others we occasionally saw doing the same. That day, the skies were blue, the sun was brilliant, the canyon mostly quiet, with bird calls every now and then. The quiet, stark surroundings also produced a sense of quiet in us. It seemed hallowed and beautiful and timeless. And at one point I had the sensation the rocks were alive, ancient beings, and we, phantom ants here for a blink, as eons of phantom ants before us. Thank you.
What a fabulous, fabulous evening.
Okay.
So many thanks to Carl Green for being here and supporting us. And to Chris Burnside for sharing his story.
Thank you.